Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Toby Birch, who is the Senior Investment Manager at Gower Financial Services. We're going to review the last quarter and then consider the possible repercussions of the general election. We're recording this episode at 11 o'clock on the day after the election. I'd like to point out that all opinions are personal and no investment advice is being given. Good morning.
Good morning, Tony. Good to see you.
How you doing? It's good to see you as ever. And
Yeah,
frightening, another quarter's gone by, isn't it? Really. But there
definitely,
we are.
definitely.
How about the last 3 months in terms of major global markets?
I think on the face of it, all looks quite rosy. You've had some decent gains in America, with the Nasdaq up strongly, but also the main S&P 500, although that's now dominated by technology, so it's not telling the full story. UK also had a good run, and actually matched America's S&P 500. The kind of surprise market that didn't do so well was Japan. That was the major call for a lot of people at the beginning of the year. And so the market's flat over the quarter, and actually it's negative in sterling terms. So the yen has been devaluing again and leaving overseas investors with a loss, which wasn't the expectation.
So interesting from that point of view. What do you put down the growth to? Inflation coming down? Does that obviously helps, I suppose?
It does. It's still quite sticky in America and hitting 2% in the UK. So on course to allow for rate cuts. Unfortunately, I think with the US election coming up in November, the Federal Reserve probably won't cut rates before then because it'll appear political and favouring the Biden administration, depending on their independence. But the main thing about the markets is this sort of never-ending desire for artificial intelligence. So this is why I've got a handful of stocks that are doing really well, and it's really distorting the market and giving a false picture. Most shares have been pretty lackluster and flat over the quarter. So it's again, you've got to be careful what's going on behind the scenes. And the strange thing is that although the market indices are doing well, there's actually been a lot of selling of the exchange traded funds in the States in favor of cash deposits. So it's one of those things where you've got a smoke screen in front of you, but when you look behind the curtain, it's not that clear a picture.
Are they getting a reasonable return on cash then in the States at the moment?
Yes, not too bad. Unlike the last 15 years, obviously, you're getting decent returns. They use a lot of money market funds in particular. It's still above inflation, which is great for savers. So it's now a realistic asset class, whereas obviously before it wasn't.
Okay, let's now take a look at the general election because Labour have won. Liberals have done well on 3 million votes. They've got 60 plus seats. Reform on 4 million votes, 4 seats. So, I think there's obviously going to be some words said about perhaps proportional representation again.
Yes, usual thing. I think in fact, Labour didn't actually increase their share of the vote.
No,
it's just that a lot of the Conservative voters went elsewhere. So again, Reform had quite a big share, and if you put Conservatives and Reform together, they account for about 38% of the total vote. So we might have a rerun of 1987 where the SDP and Liberals got together. Obviously, it'll all be denied initially, but I think political expediency is the word that comes to mind with politics. So watch this space.
It seems to me that the 5 main issues outlined by Rishi Sunak when he took office are really, in today's terms, still the 5 main issues.
Exactly.
So wondering if we could go down the list because, he said he would halve inflation. Well, he didn't do it.
No, I think that was a bit sneaky because obviously he's a financial guy, and all you need to do is look at the futures markets to give you like a sort of built-in inflation number for the future, or the best guess for it. So it's obvious it was coming down anyway, and to say that we're going to halve it is I know, that really irked me, to be honest.
Well,
It was,
politicians don't have the ability to do things like that. I mean, it's the
mm,
markets, isn't it, and things like that that determine inflation.
yeah, and central bank policy,
Yeah.
all sorts of external events, with the oil price and war, and there's so many inputs, and again, you can only jack up interest rates, but the Bank of England are independent, so it's got nothing to do with the government in theory.
Okay. The next point he made was to grow the economy.
Yeah, this has been really poor into the Conservatives. In 2010, the private sector was double the public sector. So you had obviously more tax receipts coming in, and now public and private are now matched. So there's just no way you can grow an economy when you've got a permanent hemorrhage, paying the civil service and public workers. Some obviously you want to have, but that's just not mathematically possible to grow. And also, you tend to find that with more government, you get more regulation.
Yeah.
So it's harder to do things. So, this idea that the next government will, burn bureaucracy is just, it's not going to happen. So it's just going to be a sluggish growth from now on, like it has been. And it's pity because the GDP per capita in both Europe and the UK has been flat for the last 15 years, like earnings per head. And in America, they've grown about 60%. So the model of trying to copy the EU is kind of destined for stagnation, unfortunately.
I mean, would you say that the balance should be 60% private, 40% public, or
I
would you
think
go
that's
even higher?
that's fair. I mean, I think that's probably the lowest you can go. I mean, it'd be okay if the earnings in the public sector weren't that high, but particularly in Channel Islands, they're spectacularly high
Mm.
for some civil servants in the islands. Um, so yeah, it's again, mathematically it doesn't make sense. You don't want the kind of this idea of having no state or government at all, but there's a fine balance on margin, which isn't 50-50, but it should be the balance towards the private sector.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The next one was reduce debt. Ho, ho, ho.
Dear, oh
I,
dear.
I actually, on this one, I thought, we're into trillions now,
Yeah,
and I'd forgotten actually what a trillion was in terms of, the amount. And 1 trillion is 1,000 billion. Yes.
yeah, and
So
it's different. I've got different definition in the states sometimes, but
yeah,
anyway,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. But
stick
but
with that.
I think the UK one perhaps works on that basis.
Yeah, yeah.
So at the end of 2023, the debt was 2.7 trillion pounds.
Hmm.
Um, how do you actually get anywhere to reducing that?
Yeah. This is the trick. The trick aspect of it is that it's not the size of the debt; it's the debt relative to the economy.
Yeah.
And so now we've got the debt is 100% of GDP, gross domestic product, um, and it's very hard to again grow from there because your interest costs start to drown out entire sectors. So it's probably the equivalent of the, if not more than the defense spending. So there's a very tricky ratio. We get to 100%. America's gone beyond it. Japan has gone to 200% or something. So this is a point where, it's a debt trap where the interest costs start to eat into the economy, and the economy contracts and devours itself effectively. And we've got ongoing deficits. So every year, country spends 6% more than it takes in. So is what you call a death roll, and it works until it doesn't. So I often use the analogy of Buckaroo. If you remember that that
Yeah,
game from the
yeah.
70s. You keep piling stuff on, and it doesn't do much until suddenly, bang! It goes and falls apart. So it's not looking good anywhere in the West, to be honest.
Is there a likelihood of an implosion?
Well, ultimately, the government is there to self-perpetuate and survive. So they wouldn't let um, the tail wag the dog. There'd likely be some change in the way that bond markets work.
Hmm.
In the past, there've been jubilees or complete resets of debt, particularly after like the South Sea bubble. And there's plenty of examples in history where this occurs. Also, when countries go belly up as well, they wipe the slate clean. It's difficult to change the payment terms of things like treasuries, because when you change the time they mature, or the coupon or interest payments, then effectively it's a default,
Mm.
and that's when things go haywire. You just can't raise money from overseas. And again, there's a lot of neoconservatives in Washington pushing for war at the moment, and that'd be a good excuse to cancel debt for Russia and China and other countries. So there's there's many ways to skin a cat where debt's concerned. You can also issue these bonds that never mature.
Undated.
Um, yeah, so you say used to be called consoles, and that's another method of issuing more and more debt and never having to repay it, apart from the interest, of course.
Mm.
So there's lots of ways to get around the problem, but until you stick with what you have, your economy's going to shrink.
Robert McDowell, a good friend of both of us,
Oh yeah,
he reckons that consoles are possibly part of the way out. So
yeah,
that would be interesting.
yeah. I
No,
think that's
so
yeah.
so
Let's cancel the currency. Yeah, it's never say never.
okay, right. Next on Mr. Sunak's list was cut waiting lists in the NHS. Not
Mm.
done, mind you. The doctor strikes, which were, in my view, largely political, didn't help.
Yeah, this is it's tough because in a sense the NHS is, I was going to say, microcosm of the UK, but it's actually the largest employer, I think. So it's actually a chunk of the UK. But often the more money you throw at anything to do with government, the more bureaucracy you get and the more bureaucrats. So less and less goes to the front line and more is spent and wasted elsewhere. And obviously the pension bill gets bigger and bigger. So I do have some sympathy with the junior doctors in particular, because they don't get paid very well. But behind
But
them, there's an
yeah,
army of
but you're talking about the new entrants. The definition of a junior doctor is anyone that isn't a consultant, isn't it?
Oh yeah, that's a good
So, I
point.
mean,
Yeah,
there must be a sort of age limit where they are reasonably well paid.
yeah. I mean, I don't know the bands. My parents are doctors, but they've
Yeah,
obviously stopped working in the NHS a long time ago. So yeah, I don't know what those are at the moment. But I mean, they would never have gone on strike. Yeah, they'd rather fall under a bus than do that. But times have changed, I'm afraid.
yeah. Unfortunately, there we are. And of course, the other major item of strategy from Mr. Sunak was stop the boats.
Yes, that's a real tough one. I think the ultimately the incentive to come to the UK is so strong because of the benefits. I mean, people are risking their lives getting on these dinghies.
Mm,
You know what it's like out in the Channel. It's incredibly dangerous. Um, so I mean, you're not at risk in France really, but
no.
there's a strong motive to get to the UK. And interesting, when they had the Rwanda flights coming in, that obviously go now, but there was a big move. I was in Dublin, was it a couple of months ago,
Mm,
uh, and what you saw there was the big encampments going on in the centre of the city, because the immigrants in the UK jumped on a ferry to Northern Ireland
yep.
and headed down south.
Walked across the
Um,
border. Yeah.
yeah, it is. Um, I can't see an easy solution other than cutting the benefits. And obviously, you don't want to be cruel or risk people's lives. But there's a point where it's just got too much, and a lot of the
You just
public are
can't do it. You
disenchanted.
can't, you cannot accept an unlimited number of people. I mean, the
Yeah,
UK population over the last few years has gone up
yeah.
tremendously.
And the thing is that the British people they have a great sense of fairness and will
Mm,
always welcome genuine immigrants in terms of if they're escaping from war or it's a political. Even taking Karl Marx,
yeah, yeah.
there's always been that tradition, and we are very fair and open. But it's a point where it's no longer fair, and it could be politically motivated. I mean, we've seen particularly on the left side in the states, when encouraging illegal immigration to get more votes,
Mm,
and it does have a smack of Roman Empire about it, where you let in these people coming from externally for a political motive, and there's consequences to it.
yeah, yeah.
And yeah, it just doesn't feel right. And um, yeah, I don't know. I haven't got the solution myself, but I can't see it improving under Labour particularly.
I suppose the other factor to take into account on this question of immigration is the fact that you'll have possibly a Le Pen government in France. They might have a slightly different attitude in terms of restricting people from getting into France in the first place.
Yeah, that's good points.
Mm,
And again, it might swing things the other way. If this continues, you might see the reform get
mm.
stronger and stronger as an opposition. Also, they've only got four seats, but as a movement, it's got to start from somewhere. I mean, you just never know. It might have as ever, life's about unintended consequences, and you might see a shift to the right in coming times, as we're seeing in France as well. So it's just all history is cycles, and we're just. I think Churchill said history's one damn thing after another. Here we are.
He had some wonderful quotes, that man.
Yeah.
Definitely. What about the market response to the election? I had a quick look at the FTSE 100, which I know you hate, first thing this morning, and it didn't show any sharp drops or anything like that. It's all factored in, presumably.
Yeah, just also disinterest. I mean, sterling is the one to watch, and that's flat as a pancake, all factored in. It's a question now whether rate cuts will come sooner because the election's over. There's no longer any political aspect.
Yeah.
So maybe later in the year we'll start to get a rate cut, but implicitly you'll probably have more inflation down the line. So rates will need to stay higher for longer.
You think that's likely to happen? Inflation?
Yeah, I mean, maybe they'll settle around 3 to 4%.
Yeah,
but won't go back to zero, obviously.
Which, when I was young, was quite acceptable.
That's right. It was the old normal.
Right, Labour has gone on the record as saying no raises in income tax, national insurance, or VAT. So where are they going to get the money from, Toby? Inheritance tax, that's a good cash cow.
Yeah. It leaves the whole gamut just saying there's no rise in three elements. There's still probably about 15 other elements you can tax. So it's what they don't say, which you've got to worry about. So pensions an obvious one for the tax-free lump sums.
Yeah.
Just everything property related, with your principal residence being free of capital gains tax allowances. I think Sunak did create a 20-point list of potential tax hikes. They won't come at once, but they'll be like death by 1,000 cuts. But they will come.
But I mean, no one's going to adjust the inheritance tax levels, are they? At this point, I mean, as my generation dies off, and we're the generation that sort of bought houses for £5,000 when we were young, and they're now worth $500,000 or something silly like that. The government's going to see this is a good way to get a load of money in over the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, at least probably freeze allowance if they're going to keep it at all. But I think one of the mandarins, Labour mandarins in civil service, was saying that the elderly have got to pay their fair share.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a signal that, in fact, the next generation will pay for it.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
It's easy to brand these, the people who've benefited from triple lock pensions. So, in fact, the elderly become the new enemy, just as the wealthy are the new enemy, and it's all a sort of downhill spiral from here.
So the tax on the pension lump sum, I mean, would you see that you were allowed X% tax-free rather than 25%, and then you get a tax surcharge coming in over and above?
Yes, we don't know what the details are yet, but that was one of the indications that pension be affected. And all these things make the challenge look very attractive. With our pension legislation, and I think I'm probably off topic, but I think we missed a trick by not improving the Alderney Airport in some way, because you've got there's a lot of potential movement of people, not just British people, but the non-doms based in London. It could have come to Alderney would be ideal for them to have a base with a decent airport, but there we go, lost chance.
Do you think the non-doms will desert the UK?
I think it's likely to be gradual. I mean, with COVID, I was speaking to a French guy yesterday. A lot of the sort of wealthy French went back home rather than stay in London. And I think that these things often don't happen in one go. It's a steady
No.
trickle.
Yeah.
And again, it's this idea that um, they don't understand the multiplier effect of having wealth in a country. In return, Britain gave security and property rights, but since the West have been confiscating Russian assets, that feeling's starting to go,
Mm.
and there's plenty of places in the world who welcome them. And again, it's already on the cards to change the tax status anyway, no matter which party got in. So, all in all, they're not being made very welcome. And if you have a closed economy, that's fine. You can tax and tilt, but they just go full stop.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing they were talking about was a windfall tax on the oil companies.
Yeah, this is pretty absurd. That all comes to
Mm.
the biggest investors in green energy. It's just just a simple fact. It's easy to target them because they're again branded as the enemy. We will still need fossil fuels for a long time to come, and the more you disincentivize them to invest in traditional and future energy, then the more expensive energy will become. It's a classic government interference of trying to sort of, aim the pitchforks at or find an enemy to blame, and everyone ends off poorer.
Yeah,
It's the same
yeah.
old, same old.
Now, the banks were getting a special tax break, weren't they? That is a loophole that might be closed in terms of the Bank of England printing money and everything.
Yeah, I mean the I think back it's just last year the corporation tax was put up again, an idiotic idea by the Conservatives. The chap I know called Liam Halligan writes the Telegraph produced a chart showing that the more you put up corporation tax, the less tax you take.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
classic
yeah, yeah, yeah.
curve example. So banks were, in order to get around this, banks were given like a reduction in surcharge, I think, or yeah, there was something that went on
Yeah.
to compensate them. So that could go again. They could be, targeted as the banks, the enemy of the people, and then you get them lending less. It's always the way that there's always a consequence of this kind of interference.
And of course, capital gains tax, that's going to be a disincentive, isn't it, to invest?
It is. It's everything about this is about these policies of they disincentivize people, and you end
Mm.
up entrepreneurs rather do nothing than
Yeah,
do more and pay more tax.
yeah.
It's a real curse. There's a real basic misunderstanding of taxation that putting up doesn't get more revenue. It's counterproductive. It's one of the absurdities of the modern era.
Now, of course, you will recall, Mr. Birch, under Messrs. Blair and Brown, we had the Public Finance Initiative,
Oh yeah,
and that turned out to be an absolute disaster, didn't it?
it did. I mean, I remember I'm from Liverpool myself, and the Carillion collapse was a major blow to building the hospital
Mm.
there. I
Yeah.
think it has come into service now, but it was all just a disaster involving these entities, and this goes to a lot of private equity as well. It's just it's all about cutting corners and um, you know doing something and moving on and cashing out. So it sounded good on paper, but it always goes wrong, unfortunately.
And with major consequences because like most of these things, it's the government that always loses out, and therefore the poor old taxpayer has to
Yeah, they always
contribute
have
to
to
the deficit.
step in and clear up the mess afterwards. Yeah.
I see also that Vauxhall Motors, who are owned by a big French group now, aren't they? Stella something or other,
Mhm.
are threatening to pull out of the UK over various matters, I think, in connection with the fact that everything is difficult. Tata Steel, do you think they're going to be around in five
Yeah, I
years'
mean,
time?
every headline about Tata is about cutting jobs in the UK. I
Yeah.
mean, on that point, again, you got government involved with Vauxhall, giving them a quota on electric vehicles, and this
Mm.
is, EV and this green agenda. It's getting a major pushback at the moment. So you start impose again. You impose these non-market related rules. The consequences that just give up and go. I have to pull my hair out. I try not to think about it too much, so it's to set me off.
But it is a fact that people have decided that they don't particularly like electric vehicles for one reason or another. Generally speaking, the range of the battery and things like that, and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
cost. I mean, some of the
exactly.
costs are crazy. And
Yeah.
and I did hear that, I don't know what vehicle it was, but the battery is integrated into the chassis.
Oh wow.
So
Okay.
when the battery goes, that's it, end of car.
Yeah, it costs a fortune to replace me. I personally would never buy one on purpose, but
No,
that's all I can say. So
we we
just
can
dying.
we continue our reign of pollution, Toby.
Exactly.
Looking at the world situation, where does China fit into all this? I mean, people are sort of saying, "Oh, we should be gearing up for World War III, etc., etc." I can't think of any example in the past where there's been a world war where you actually owe the enemy so much money.
That's right. It's all saying that if you owe the bank a pound, it's your problem. If you owe them a billion, it's their problem. I think it's pretty unfair in the Chinese. Again, I've been studying Mandarin for a while, so I've got a bit of insight. But
Yeah,
they feel that they've been invaded time and again, which they have,
yeah,
and they've never invaded anyone. They've had a brief incursion into Vietnam at one point, but as a country, they don't invade other places. So a lot of this is a bit like with NATO expanding east. It's just trying to keep poking at China and Russia. It feels like they're trying to provoke a war on purpose, whether that's to reset debt or because that's the mindset of neoconservatives to always have an enemy. It's absolutely insane. Napoleon and Hitler found out what it was like to start a war with Russia. You're not going to win. And
yeah.
China, in particular, their military is quite incredible. So yeah, China's been selling its US bonds for the last 4 years. Think about $250 billion worth. And all they've been doing is they've been buying gold instead, which is the ultimate form of money. And so, yeah, who's going to buy US bonds now? We've already got de-dollarization going on with developing countries trading among themselves, not using US dollars for commodities. And so, these things don't happen all of a sudden, but it looks like there's going to be a gradual trend of dollar weakness if no one buys your debt. I mean, the Federal Reserve might buy it and just create a fake demand like they did with quantitative easing. Again, they'll do anything just to keep overspending. That's the nature of the government. But from the Chinese point of view, they'll just keep getting rid of dollar assets, as will other developing countries, as have Saudi Arabia, as we've discussed before, because you can get it confiscated. If war starts,
Yeah.
you'll get interest payments. So there's no incentive to buy US debt anymore.
If China was to invade Taiwan, do you think that would trigger anything, or would the West just let them get on with it?
No, I don't think it would genuinely trigger something. I know from my son being in the military, he did exercises with American Marines in California, where they tried to replicate it, taking back Taiwan, and the kill ratio against the Americans was 10-1.
Yeah.
It's not looking, it's not looking very good, and I think that would be an incredibly difficult maneuver to pull off if the Chinese did invade. There is obviously this goes back to the 1940s and 50s with when the National Party left China to Taiwan and
That's right.
took a lot
Yeah.
of the national
Chiang
treasures. So
Kai-shek, wasn't it? Yeah.
yeah, so this goes way back, and yes, I still think on balance, given that we're trying to start a war, then any excuse will do, whether it's Taiwan or Russia.
But yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is that Taiwan would be similar to Ukraine, wouldn't it?
Effectively, maybe it's
I
not.
know it's separated by water and everything else, but
Yeah, yeah,
the principle would be the same.
yeah. I
Got
know Ukraine's not part of NATO, but
no, but
if they were
Putin
made
reckons it's
members,
part of Russia.
was that? Well, yeah,
Putin reckons it's part of Russia, as do the
if
Chinese think Taiwan is part of
yeah,
China. Yeah.
and yeah, there's a lot of Putin did a long interview on Ukrainian history, and there's in his defense, the area which he invaded was Russian speaking, and the Ukrainians had been imagine like an apartheid system in South Africa. That's what the Russian speakers were undergoing in
Mm.
that part of Ukraine.
Yeah.
So there's always two sides to the story, And if you just listen to the BBC, you'll only get one side.
I couldn't agree more with you, Toby.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree
It's not
more with
popular
you.
opinion, as Farage found out the other day when he said that NATO was, prompted the war in Ukraine. But
Yeah,
it's
but the crazy thing was Johnson a year later said exactly the same thing.
yeah.
So they can be
There you
very
go.
selective, I'm afraid.
Exactly.
How about interest rates on mortgages? It's going to be a little while before they cool off and come down, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't see that. In the UK, there's been some indication that they're getting more competitive and that there's more emphasis on cheaper mortgages. However, in the Channel Islands, that's not going to happen. They sort of take advantage of the quasi monopoly status. So yeah, here it won't change very much, but in the UK it should.
Yeah.
The longer term rates should come down. Again, it's based on the bond market itself and gilts, but as long as they don't fall apart, then the trend should be down.
Have the Bank of England managed it properly?
Well, you could say if any central bank they badly got it wrong with saying that inflation was temporary, and you only had to look at the way the money supply went off the scale and how that affects interest rates in the past to say that that they had missed a trick. And to be fair, at the time things are pretty rough, so to start putting up rates at the time they should have would have been pretty dismal, but the right thing to do. So it's a question of whether they're going to be do the right thing or be popular, because you can't always be both. And that's how what Volcker did in 1982 in the States. He jacked up interest rates to break inflation, because they had gone on before and had been tamed, but inflation came roaring back again. So there are lessons from the past. Yeah, they could have done a better job, but it's all easy with hindsight.
So, in closing, what's the Mr. Birch prognosis for the next quarter?
Traditionally, in election years in the States, you do get a good July. Also, you talk about the summer doldrums. Sun and May go away, come back on St. Swithin's Day, which is in September. And traditionally, that 6-month period has been a flat time for markets, apart from US election years when it's quite good. So I think that things are looking okay for the time being.
Yeah.
We do have this geopolitical caveat with World War. I mean, we might look back in future and say, well, this was like the phony war in 1939.
Yeah.
And all kicked off. But for the time being, I'm pretty positive on markets. I'd like to think for the Channel Islands, again, these changes in the UK could have some might say it's a negative effect with more people coming in, but at least it's not the other way around of people wanting to leave. And I think we'll benefit from this. And just very pleased we've got the pension regime we have and the tax regime. So long may it live.
Long may it live. Yeah, and no GST for the time being.
Thank goodness. Yeah.
But there we are. As ever, it's been an absolute pleasure and privilege to have a chat with you.
Thank you, James.
A lot of people enjoy these episodes of Tony at 12, and
hopefully a bit different
you have a growing fan club.
Oh, thank you.
So many thanks.
Cheers, Tony. Thank you.
Hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.